Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti from AnthonyMorganti.com. This is episode 20 of the video series where I critique and process your image. And yes, I decided to do a few more episodes of this series. I received a lot of positive feedback from folks telling me they really enjoy the series, and that pretty much outweighed the few emails I received from people that hated the series. So, thank you everyone for your comments. We'll do another few episodes and see how it goes. In this episode, we're taking a look at this image from Eric. I think it's a great image, and I think I could show you a couple things I haven't showed you in previous episodes. Now, as far as the composition, I think it's great. Eric told me he was on a boat, and when you're on a boat, it's bobbing up and down, the boat is moving. It's sometimes difficult to shoot a very straight, level image, so it's a little crooked. But the composition pretty much is perfect, in my opinion. We have this foreground element, which is this rock up here in the foreground and over here. Then we have the midground element, which is the lighthouse and this arch here. Then we have a kind of a background element, which is this arch here and the pine trees on top of the arch. And then we have the great backdrop, which is a nice sky and nice light. So it's a really cool image. I like that this inlet is coming out from the corner of the image and going out through the base. So that helps lead you through the shot. So very well done. Now, as far as the camera settings, it was an 18 to 55 millimeter f/3.5 to 5.6 lens shot at 55 millimeters. So that effectively at 55 millimeters is wide open at 5.6. And Eric shot it wide open at 5.6, ISO 200 in 1/320th of a second. Now, I mentioned in every episode that for landscape images, you'd like to be in that sweet spot area of your lens, and that's 2 to 4 stops up from wide open. So in this case, when you're at 5.6, you're wide open, and you prefer to be closer to f11 to get in that sweet spot range of the lens. Now, to do that in this instance, if he wanted to keep his ISO at 200, he would use a very slow shutter speed, and you're going to get a blurry shot. You're on a boat, and the boat's moving, and it's bobbing up and down. And so this is kind of the trade-off in photography. You got to figure what you want to do here. Do you really want to shoot at that lens sweet spot f8, f11, and then up your ISO so you could still use a fast enough shutter speed so you don't get a blurry image and introduce noise in the image? So it's kind of, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, and it's really a creative decision that you have to make. It's a technical decision that you have to make, which will affect the creative elements of your image. So, I don't really have a problem with them shooting wide open. I think I would have preferred, I'm not super familiar with the camera used, how the higher ISO uh, performances on the camera. But I think if he could have even just went up to f8 and used ISO 400, I would, it would have been just a little better. But as you could see, it turned out great anyway. So, you know, I don't really have too much of a problem with it. It's just something that, you're going to have to decide on the go when you're shooting. So, the image itself is fine. Now, the first thing I'm going to do for processing is what I usually do is I go to lens corrections and I enable profile corrections, remove chromatic aberration. Now, the next thing is to straighten the image, and usually I will go to the transform tab in Lightroom, and this is only in Lightroom 6, Lightroom CC, by the way, latter versions of Lightroom 6, later Lightroom CC. So if you're using Lightroom 5, you won't have this transform tab or some of these controls. Some of this will be in the lens correction tab. But I digress. Now we want to straighten it. Usually you'd click auto, but usually this works best if you have a very strong horizontal line like the horizon or a very strong vertical line in the image. And we have neither in this shot. We do have a bit at the end of the water here is probably a strong horizontal line, but there's not enough of it there. And we have a vertical line here on the lighthouse, but there's not enough of it there. So I suspect when I click auto, it straightened it, but not enough. So we're going to click off and we're going to use another method. So we're going to go up to the crop tool. And I really didn't talk about his composition, so outside of the elements and the depth of the composition, but about as far as compositional rules, you can see right when I open the crop tool, we have the rule of thirds, and this really didn't fall on rule of thirds type overlay at all. Nothing in the image works with rule of thirds. To me, in my mind, in my opinion, this is purely my opinion, another good compositional rule is the golden spiral. And I suspect that this lighthouse is going to be right on the golden spiral. So I'm going to hit the O key on the keyboard to get different compositional overlays until I get that golden spiral. And there it is. It is right on top of that golden spiral. And if your golden spiral isn't right configured properly for where you need it, you would hit Shift O and it will flop it all around so you can put it in different positions. And as you can see, so it worked out good. All right, now this next little thing I want to show you, I must credit Benjamin Warde. Benjamin Warde is I believe he's employed by Adobe, and he does videos on the Adobe website on Lightroom and Photoshop. So if you search for him, just search Benjamin Warde, and I think he spells his last name Warde. So search for him and put Adobe at the end, like Benjamin Warde Adobe or Benjamin Warde Lightroom, and you'll find a lot of videos that he has. And he has a lot of great teaching videos. And I just saw this one recently, and I think it's brilliant. Now, a lot of times when we're going to crop an image or we're going to straighten an image, it's difficult because there's a lot of distractions on the screen. Now, just as I have it open now, I have all the panels open, and if let's say I'm not going to crop this image, but let's say I was cropping the image, you could see then that we have actually the image still visible over here that I'm trying to get rid of. So it makes it difficult to really get a good eye on the image if we have all these distractions. And what his tip was is that he hits Shift Tab to get rid of all the panels. So that makes your image as large as possible. Then he hits the L key on the keyboard. And if you hit the L key once, we call that lights dim. And if you hit it a second time, that's lights out. So we go lights dim, lights out. So now we have the lights out. Now we just have the image to deal with. And the cool part here, if you, let's say, were cropping the image, you're just going to see the image. You're not the part of the image that you're keeping. You're not going to see any other part of the image that you're getting rid of. So it works out really, really well. And I really like this tip. So credit to Benjamin Warde on that. Now, I just want to straighten this image, and the way I want to do it is I just want to come off the image, and you see how I get that double arrow. And then when I click with my left mouse button, I get all these vertical and horizontal lines, which will help me straighten the image. And I'm just going to look at the horizontal line that is closest to the edge of the water out here. And I'm just going to drag my mouse to try to make it eyeballed as straight as possible. Just like that. Then hit Enter. Then I'm going to hit Shift Tab. Oh, I should hit, now I brought the panels back, but I have lights out still. So I hit L key on my keyboard again. So that's a third time. Lights dim, lights out, then turn off. It just turns the lights back on. So lights dim, lights off, lights on, let's say. And so we have this now. So just for this demonstration, I'm going to close these two tabs so you could see what I'm doing a little better. So we have a nice straight image now. Now, one thing I like to do, and I haven't done it in any, I don't think I've done it in any of the previous videos, is a lot of times, especially for landscape images, I like to look at a different camera profile. Specifically, with my Nikon lenses, the landscape profile does a really nice job to render contrast and color in such a way that makes landscape images shot with Nikon cameras very pleasing. And this was shot with a Canon camera, but I found too that the landscape profile for Canon cameras does a great job as well. So we're going to go to camera calibration, and I like to do this early in the processing if I'm going to do it at all, because these profiles that are in this drop down very often will change your image considerably. And to me, it's counterproductive if you do this last, because you'll many times will have to go back up to the basic panel and readjust brightness, a lot of the tone values of the image and or the contrast of the image, and sometimes even bring saturation and or vibrance down, because these sometimes will really boost the color vibrance of the image. So again, I'm just going to mention too that these profiles are camera specific. So if you don't have the same exact model camera that Eric has, yours may be different. My Nikon, like I don't have Camera Faithful in my Nikon and Fuji cameras and so on. So anyway, what we're going to do is I'm just going to go through them one by one and just look at them. So camera faithful, I don't care for. Camera landscape. Now this is the one that I think I like because it seems to increase the contrast a little bit, and it seems to just bring the vibrance up just a touch. So I like that one. There's camera neutral. It's a little flatter. Camera portrait actually looks pretty good on this landscape. And just because it says corporate or portrait, if you like it on a landscape, use it. All right. Camera standard, that's pretty good too. Go back to Adobe standard, which is the base. I'm going to use that as the base. And I just like the camera landscape. And that's what I'm going to roll with. So again, those will be specific to your model camera, and I suggest you do them early in your processing because it will really affect the entire image, and you may have to come back and readjust things if you do it later in your processing. So now we're going to process the image like we normally would. Now, I want to bring highlights down. I want to try to bring some detail in the sky, but I don't want to make it too dark. You know, I'm just eyeballing it, so I'm just going to go there. Now, again, I'm going to open shadows up quite a bit because I'm going to add a lot of contrast to the image, and it's going to, you know, change this. So that's, you know, pretty flat now. I don't do whites and blacks yet. I'm going to do clarity later. I think this image too, I'm not going to use a plugin for it. I'm going to use just Lightroom because I think Lightroom will do a great job. I'm going to bring vibrance up, and I'm not sure if it's the same person that often asks me, or if multiple people are asking me why I don't do saturation. I don't often do saturation. Vibrance will increase the intensity of the color of those colors that are in the image that aren't already at or near full saturation. Saturation, on the other hand, will really oversaturate things that are already saturated and or bring those things that are close to saturation to saturation. A lot of times that will make the image not look more realistic. So I prefer vibrance. If you know, usually now I don't do things 100% of the time the same way every single time. So there are some images that may look a little dull, and I'll bring saturation up. But this image has a lot of color in it, a lot of tonal variation. So I don't think that there's a lot of you know, need, or there isn't a need for me to mess with saturation or to bring vibrance up much. And even when I do bring vibrance or saturation up, I don't bring it up too much. So I like +9. Now I prefer the tone curve for contrast as opposed to the contrast slider, and you can see how it made those darker parts a little darker. And I kind of like strong contrast on this image. It seems to really bring out the color. It makes the sun look warmer, like it's just rising or just setting for that matter, but I like it. So I like that. Now we're going to get a quick white point. I'm going to hold the Shift key in, double click on the word whites. And that brought that down quite a bit. Maybe a little too much for my taste, but we'll see. I'm going to hold the Shift key and double click on the word blacks. And I like that. I like the black point. Let's just double check this white point. I'm going to hold the Alt or Option key. It's Alt if you have a PC, Option if you have a Mac, and click on the white slider. And nothing is clipping. I don't see anything clipping at all. Now I'm just going to eyeball the image, and I'm just going to push whites to the right a little bit. I'm just going to bring those up. I just think I like that better. All right, so that's just personal preference. Again, when you're processing, it's personal preference, right? So I like it. It seems like we have still a lot of depth. The image naturally had a lot of depth already in it, just the way the light was and the way it's composed. So we just, there wasn't a lot we could do in processing to make that even give it more depth. We just didn't want to lose any of that depth. So we still have a lot of nice shadows, and we still have some detail in the shadows, a lot of bright areas. If I hit the J key on the keyboard, I could see we're just clipping slightly down in here. You can see this blue shows where we're clipping the shadows. Tiny bit in here. Doesn't look like we're clipping any highlights, but that's okay. So we're going to hit the J key again. And I like that. So I think I'm done with the basic panel and the tone curve panel. We're not going to do anything with HSL or split toning. We're going to go right into detail. The way I prefer to do it is I like to take care of the noise first before I sharpen it. And then I come back and I'll go back in the basic panel and then I'll add clarity. All right, that's the way I prefer to do it. So we're just going to do this. I like to take care of noise relatively early. There's a little like bird way off here in the distance too that I'm noticing. And a lot of times these things that are way off in the distance you'd like to get rid of because it will just look like a speck of dirt if you print this. So we got rid of that right away. And you know, if I had time, the video, we're a little constrained with time, I would go through the image, you know, zoomed in like this and try to find any more little birds off in the distance and just zap them away. So we're going to do noise reduction first. I'm just going to move it to 50 and it got rid of the noise at 50 perfectly. I'm going to move it down to 40 and there's a tiny bit of noise there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave it at 50. I'm going to bring it back to 50. And then I'm going to drag the image to something I feel is important, which is the lighthouse. And I am going to put sharpening up to like 60. And it did sharpen nicely. I like it. I like it. Did introduce a tiny bit of noise in the sky. So what we're going to do is I'm going to zoom out and I'm just going to hold the Alt or Option key. And again, that's Alt if you have a PC, Option if you have a Mac. We're going to click on masking. And whatever is white is being sharpened. So as I move that to the right, whatever is black is not being sharpened. So we're not going to sharpen a lot of the sky. And that will help eliminate any noise we introduced when we turned the amount of sharpening up. So the detail is done. We did pretty much everything else. The other thing I usually like to do is I like to add a dark vignette. In this case, I don't know if it needs it. We have this darker foreground stuff in here and over here. So it's kind of naturally giving you a little bit of a natural vignette and help leading your eyes towards the middle of the picture and or the lighthouse. So what I'll do maybe is just a tiny bit, and all I want to do is just kind of burn the edges just a touch. So here is before and after. I mean, it's just super subtle, just a tiny bit. It's just going to make those just slightly darker than, let's say, right in here. So it helps bring you more towards the middle of the image. And, you know, so far, so good. One thing I didn't do, and I often do this, is because I save clarity for later, I often forget to do it and then realize later. So we're going to turn clarity up. And then I would come back in and double check my noise reduction too now. So I think clarity looks good. Might be just a little bit too rugged. What do you guys think? Now this is another type of thing I often do. Now I process this, and before I rush off and send it on Instagram or Facebook or something like that, or you know, wherever, is I'll wait. I'll leave my computer for a while, rest my eyes, and come back. And it almost looks, and you guys give me your opinion below. I'm going to leave it like this. I'm not going to do anything more. It almost looks like it's almost too sharp. There's a little bit too much clarity. Now I'm not sure what you guys feel about this. Let me know in the comments below. But I'd say, you know, if I come back later and I feel it is, I just bring clarity down a little bit, and I think we're good to go. So that's it for episode 20. Thank you, Eric, for sharing this image with us. Also, again, Benjamin Warde gave us that tip on the lights out, lights dim, all that stuff on how to crop and kind of remove distractions. So thank you, Benjamin Warde, for that. And thank you, everyone that watches my videos. I truly do appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.